Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Juneteenth. Welcome to our law and policy space. My name is Shelby Ward. I'm the Director of Sustainable Tennessee for the Tennessee Environmental Council. And with the council, we have these law and policy spaces where we can talk about policy and practical practices in our everyday life to advance the work that we do here at the council. We educate and advocate for the conservation and improvement of Tennessee's communities, environment, and public health. So we're really excited to have you all here today, and then also to hear from our guest speaker. And with that, I want everyone to have a great time, and we are excited to take questions and then also to hear from our speaker. And as we're gearing up here, please feel free to say hi in the chat, and then also just let us know where you're listening from. So whether it's Nashville, elsewhere in Tennessee, or even beyond, if folks are joining us from outside of the state, just please let us know in the chat. So for today, our guest speaker is Pat Flood. Pat Flood is a senior advisor to TDEC, the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, and he's their former division head of their solid waste division. Pat has worked in the solid waste industry since 1991, and he has degrees in various engineering fields from the Illinois Institute of Technology, Purdue, and Clemson. And Pat is a registered engineer in 14 states. So with that, Pat, welcome to the law and policy space.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to be here. I don't think it was Shelby's problems with the technology. I'm old and decrepit, and so I always blame myself. My apologies for that. Can you all hear me okay? Can I see a wave of hands, nods? Good, thanks. So I'm, Shelby, you're gonna have to refresh my memory as to how I pick up the share screen. Oh, there it is.
Oh, yes.
Screen. Okay. So the screen share, you still
Yes.
seeing me?
I am going to double check something. Okay. So can you
Oh, there we
do your
go.
screen share? Okay.
Yep, there we go. All righty. Excellent. Except the icon for the full screen is now hidden. Let's try that. All right. Can you all see that? You all see the screen now? Should just be the focus slide kind of thing. I can't see anybody.
Okay, yes, I can see. So if anyone can't see, you can let me know in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and let me know.
Yep, so I had to minimize the my view of you so that I could access some of the controls. But I am just going to go ahead and get started. Shelby, let me know. I can hear you, so let me know if something goes woefully wrong.
Okay, great. I'll do that, Pat. And just to let everyone know, Pat has a presentation, and we'll take questions after. And you can put your questions in the chat, and I, can take note of those and bring them to Pat's attention at the end. Or you could ask your question after the slides as well.
Yep, thank you for that. And just as a reminder, so I want to talk about who does what at the regarding recycling. So in my former position, and I've only been out of that position for a couple of months, I was director of the Division of Solid Waste Management. And we have various pieces of that solid waste management. But one of those pieces is that we provide guidance and grants to local governments to help them improve their recycling systems. So I kind of, as a reminder, want to let everybody know that really recycling happens. The boots are on the ground at the local level. It states there, we have a lot of expertise at the state. We have money, oftentimes even better than expertise. So we do write grants and things like that, but the work actually happens at the local level. And I think you'll get a sense of that as I go through the presentation, because I'll talk about some things that can happen at the state, but the bulk of what I'm going to talk about are the things that happen at the local level and how we can help improve how things happen at the local level. And I'm going to very quickly just do kind of a backstory on recycling, how we got to this point, but I'm hoping to spend the bulk of the time talking about where we are right now, and more importantly, how we can do better. So with that, I'm just going to dive into the pool and get started. So ancient history of recycling, meaning the last 30 years or so. Actually, the last couple of hundred years. So people talk about recycling and reuse and things like that, that it's a modern construct. Nothing could be further from the truth. For the most of recorded history, reuse and recycling has really been an important thing for us. And our ancestors would frankly not be happy at how much we waste stuff. So when we talk about reuse and we talk about recycling, we're really just getting back to something that we as a people have traditionally done. So disposable culture, culture of wastefulness, very recent, really kind of picked it up in the last 50, 100 years. So a couple of things that have driven this, productivity. When you kind of get into an age where there's a lot of industry and manufacturing and stuff, it's hard to salvage all the bits and pieces. So high industrial output kind of drives, to a certain extent, a bit of wastefulness. But sadly, a lot of it is just we've gotten comfortable with not recycling and not reusing stuff. So some of this is on us. Some of this is just a function of people's laziness, and we need to stop that. So more recent history um, is, what are we doing with recycling? So where we do well with recycling is where industries exist to use the recovered materials. And that's going to be kind of a theme that I have in this presentation, in that you can recycle all you want, but if nobody's using the materials, it doesn't do you any good. So you have to drive the demand. There has to be some demand. So where there's manufacturers that are making new box board from old cardboard, that people tend to actually do better on recycling cardboard, OCC. And the reason is because the pricing is a little bit better. So economics do tend to drive things. So metals, where there's industries that are reusing those metals, we tend to do better about recapturing them. When there's paper mills, tissue, toilet tissue, which is in a bit of scarce supply right now, almost all of that, at least half of that, comes from recycled paper. So we want to make sure that those materials are being recycled into new tissue. And where we're doing that, where there's a user for that paper, it tends to go pretty well. We really struggle where there's limited use for the recycled materials. Plastics are very much hit or miss, and they're great where there's a manufacturer, not so great in other places. Glass, and I'll try to avoid talking about glass, not a success story, but really struggles on the demand side for glass. And organics. So organics, and I'm going to make a subcategory of organics, which is food waste. I'll talk a little bit about food waste as we move on. But organics, we can have composting facilities pretty much everywhere. Well, when I was division director, we completely changed our regulations on composting facilities to make it easier for us to compost. At the time, we only had 2 composting facilities in the entire state of Tennessee. We have a fair number, quite a number, probably 20 or better right now, and that's just because we've made it easier. So organics is something that we can really do a good job of managing at the local level. So a lot of you have probably heard about the problem with China, where China was taking a lot of recyclables, but we did kind of a bad job, and I'm gonna not impugn the state of Tennessee, which mostly had local markets for recycling, but the East and West Code West Coast were really shipping a lot of their materials over to China. They weren't very careful about making sure that the materials were indeed recyclable. So they had a lot of unrecyclable materials there, and they had a lot of contaminants in there. And I'll talk about contaminants later. So that really got to be a problem, and China ended up having to dispose of almost all the materials that received. So they just kind of said, stop, we're not doing this anymore. And all of the, well, not all, but most of the recycling efforts in the East and West Coast ground to a halt as a result of that. And they're trying hard to find recycling markets. And now, where Tennessee used to send a lot of their recycling materials, now there's a lot of competition for that recycling, which has driven down prices and made recycling programs lose even more money. So that's really a problem. So let's talk about where we're at right now, the current state of recycling. Businesses do a really good job of recycling. And when I talk about businesses, mostly I'm talking about the big manufacturing facilities that have traditionally created a lot of waste, but they do a much better job right now. So for starters, they've got a strong incentive to do that. They make money. Waste costs them money. So if you're an automotive manufacturer and you're stamping out steel parts, any steel you don't use or you send to a landfill, that's money you're losing. So they do a pretty good job of capturing that. Industries, by and large, see it as good public policy and will really avoid generating waste. They're proud of their zero waste programs or their zero landfills programs, and they will lose some money. They won't lose a lot of money. If it gets to be a problem for them, they will take another look at what they're doing. But they will actually be willing to lose some money to accomplish waste reduction, and they should be applauded for that. Um, so if businesses have their good points, they also have their bad points because businesses create problems for recycling for households. Packaging. So a lot of people are probably getting a lot of stuff shipped to them directly in boxes and stuff. And the boxes are packaging and the new products are packaging. So a lot of what companies do is that they want to protect their products and they end up creating a lot of what I think is excessive packaging. And so that's just kind of a waste. And it doesn't really impact the companies. They've shifted that over to individuals. So now households are having to deal with that. Um, some of what they've made are what I call multi-polymer layered films, and you'll see some juices and things like that that are now in multi-layered film packaging. And it's just impossible to recycle that because you would have to separate it out into the component polymers to recycle it properly, and you just can't do that. It's built not to come apart. So that's a problem. Um, and frankly, most products are built not to come apart, which mostly that's a problem for recycling. I think of tires though. Tires, when you recycle tires, it's very difficult to separate the rubber from the steel, from the other components that are in the tires. But when I'm driving on those tires, I want it to be really hard for that to be deconstructed. So a lot of that difficulty to deconstruct is intentional. Good for tires when I'm driving them, bad for tires when it's time to recycle them. So that's kind of a problem. In another presentation, I'll talk about extended producer responsibilities, but that's when the manufacturers receive the product back and they're responsible for deconstructing and recycling. Some computers, I believe Dell is one of them, are that way where you ship the computer back and they take it apart and they do the recycling. And when they're responsible for that, they tend to do a better job of making it easy to recycle. So but even given all that, households typically don't do as well as businesses do. I don't think we explore reuse as much as we should. Try to reuse all the stuff that we use. I encourage everybody to try to reuse. reuse rather than rebuying and things like that. Uh, some places where they have curbside pickup, capture rates should be very high because it's relatively simple for recycling, but they're shockingly low. We need to do better. And I get it, where you don't have curbside recycling, your capture rates tend to be very low. I myself live in a place that does not have curbside, and I have to pay somebody to come and take my recycling. And I get it. I could just throw it in with the trash. That seems very wrong to me. I won't do that. But others, probably will view that differently. But even still, capture rates are too low even when we don't have curbside recycling. In contamination, that's one of my pet peeves, is we have a lot of contamination in what we're capturing. So we need to stop contaminating. We need to pay very close attention to the condition of the materials that we're recycling. And I will talk about that a little later too. So there's some things that are really fundamentally working against us regarding recycling. So uh, lack of mandated recycling at the state level. Okay, that's at the state. I'll own that. There are other states, California, Washington, that just mandate it. Now, it doesn't mean that they got people that can do anything with those materials, but it does drive up the capture rate. So I'm here to tell you, we're probably not going to change that in the state of Tennessee, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to start making that happen at the local level. So something that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on is kind of in the weeds accounting issues, cost shifting. Um, so cost shifting really kind of occurs when you shift things from one category to another. Ideally, when you buy a product, that product cost would include everything that goes into the cost of that product, but it doesn't, because disposal costs are almost never included in a product's purchase cost. So that cost gets shifted off to someone else. And oftentimes it's pushed off to the household or the consumer, or if somebody throws it out their car window, that cost can be shifted over to a city or a county who has to go and pick that material up. But the cost really ideally should be picked up in the purchase price of the product. We also don't really do a good job on life cycle analysis. I could talk all day about that, but one of the examples are, if your waste goes to a city or a county landfill, that landfill is like dead. It's not generating tax revenue. It's not being used for anything productive. It's just off the tax roll, dead land. And nobody takes that into account. There is no way to capture that in a life cycle analysis. Um, so I think everybody knows right now that commodity prices for recycled materials are very low. So every recycle program I know of is losing money, and losing a lot of money right now just because commodity prices are low. They're competing against the cost of virgin materials. So virgin materials are low cost right now too. So that's a headwind. That's really a problem. We don't have sufficient numbers of end users for the captured recyclables. So if we had folks that were, using boxboard or plastic or metal cans as feedstock for their industry, that would be helpful. That would create more demand, that would drive prices up for recyclables, and that would make all of this more sustainable. We just don't have enough. We need more of that. Again, my pet peeve, high recycled material contamination rates. A lot of what we collect is just contaminated, unusable. So it has to be separated out, sent for disposal. That drives up the cost of recycling needlessly. Need to do a better job on that. So, so what can we do? So I've got basically a three strategic approach, three strategies, and I'm going to try to take a little more breaths and slow my talking down a little bit because I really want to dwell on these because these are what we can do to improve recycling. So I've got some ideas and I've got some resources, and I want this to really be the focus of the presentation. So starting with strategy one, local initiatives. I think people forget that they have a lot of power and a lot of influence. So it's important that you make your intentions known. On a different topic from recycling, we're seeing a lot of that right now. And I think that's going to result in a lot of overdue and needed change. And if we could bring that level of initiative and power and influence to the recycling, we could see a lot of improvements then. But that has to be done at the local level. And so by local level, that means your city commissioners, county commissioners, get to know them, get the connections with them. So a lot of what people do that I see is that they like contact the governor's office or send a letter to the governor or something like that. And that's not that helpful. Not that the governor doesn't care. He's a good guy. He really does care. But that stuff just gets routed back to the divisions. And I have issued a lot of letters and a lot of emails on behalf of the governor because he just kind of routes that to us, and it's hard to move things at the state. It's a big bureaucracy. It's hard to make things change. You have more power at the local level. You can make your local commissioners make some changes. And if you need to have something happen at the state, it actually makes a big difference to have the local commissioners contact the state legislators or the governor. That has a better impact. So work the system. That's how it gets done the best. So early on, what probably feels like 45 minutes ago now, I talked about what it is that the state does do. And the state has, excuse me, the state has grants. And so you will, it is important to leverage those grants to improve things at the local level. I'm here to tell you, timing's a little bad right now. State doesn't have much money. I understand the legislature just passed our budget last night. I know it's bad. So I don't think we're going to have a lot of money for grants in the near term, but this will pass. The economy will improve. We will have money for grants in the future. So start thinking about what you could do with that. So, and again, a little insight as to how things work. Almost always state grants are used for capital efforts. So let's say that you've got a local collection facility and they're collecting aluminum, but not really very well. It's just kind of loose. It's hard to get that aluminum economically. Nobody wants it just in kind of a loose configuration. But if you had a baler, a crusher and a baler, and you could convert that aluminum to a crushed and baled block of aluminum, then manufacturers want that. So you could submit a grant to request a crusher and a baler, and that would be helpful. We write a lot of grants for things like baling for cardboard. Very helpful to be moving stuff around in bales. So it creates efficiencies. So state grants, capital efforts. What we can't generally and almost never pay for is people to work at recycling facilities and for people to do curbside and stuff like that. That has to be paid for at the local effort, but we can buy balers and crushers and trucks and all kinds of stuff to make that all happen. So keep that in mind, work the system. Identify areas needing improvement. So if you're overlooking some commodities, find it and find a way to improve it. If for whatever reason you're not collecting cardboard or paper or something like that, you can make those things happen. I was doing a presentation very similar to this one up, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the county in Northwest Tennessee, and I'm actually going through charts and graphs showing how they were doing in their region in terms of recyclables. And all of a sudden, in the middle of looking at some bar charts, people jumped up and started woo-hooing and high-fiving each other. And generally, I don't get that kind of reaction with bar charts. So I was a little confused on that. And what they could see, because I had year over year bar charts, is that they could see very clearly when the town had started their paper recycling program, because the bar chart shot up significantly. Well, we kind of look at numbers at regional and state levels. I can't catch anything like that. They saw it, and it made a big difference. So you can find stuff that's being overlooked and set up the local programs. Food waste. If recyclable contamination is a pet peeve of mine, food waste is also a pet peeve of mine. Clearly that has to happen at the local level. Clearly that can happen everywhere. We're just not doing a very good job with that. We need to do better. So think about capturing food waste. Um, You'll have to do a little research, I think, at times. If you've got a local, your town, and they are collecting recyclables, you probably want to kind of take a look at the contracts and find out who's getting what and kind of work with the existing contracts to try to make sure that that they're getting what they need, that the manufacturers are getting what they need, and if is there any way to improve the system. So local organizations can be great for that. Improve quality of recycled materials. So I've twice now mentioned contamination, so I won't do it a third time, but we've just got to do better. So that's something that can happen also at the local level. And it would be helpful to think like a manufacturer. Think about what they want to receive and what they're doing with the material. And the more we can get recycled materials to be in line with what the manufacturer needs, the more value there's going to be associated with that. The more value associated with those materials, the better price they get for those materials, and the more sustainable these programs become. So talk to the local manufacturer or their reps and try to understand what they need, and let's try to get it. So that's strategy one. So speaking of the private sector, strategy two is working with the private sector. Um, so I'll talk briefly about what we can and cannot do at the state level. And I realized yesterday that I used an acronym that probably means nothing to anybody but me, ECD. And I meant to correct that. I'm so sorry, Shelby, I botched that. ECD is a state agency. It's Economic and Community Development. And what they do is at the state level, they go out and they recruit businesses to the state of Tennessee. And they give them money to relocate to the state of Tennessee. And businesses like receiving money to help with their setup and relocation costs. So that's basically a good thing. But what ECD at the state level is doing is that they have a single metric that they use to decide whether a prospect is good or not. That metric is jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. It's all about jobs at the state. I would like it to be all about jobs and environmental problems solved, which, you know, for the same number of jobs, if we could bring in a manufacturers that use recycled materials as a feedstock, that would be a twofer in my mind. That would really be a good thing to do. So I've griped and griped and griped and whined and whined and whined, and I'm not going to be able to change ECD at the state level. Maybe given enough time, but probably not. But I think that can be done at the local level, because local uh, governments do recruitment as well, and your voices can be better heard at the local level. So talk about your local governments, talk about recruiters, and talk about, hey, we need some folks that are going to be using some of the recycled materials that we're generating. So I've already talked about this, my bad. It's all about incentives. So waste reduction, not just job creation. Another thing that we like to do is recognize when businesses are doing well. So some businesses just do great at zero waste and recycling, and you just couldn't be happier for what their efforts are. Some just stink. You know, they're really just bad. So you also have a lot of buying power. You also have recognition power. So support businesses that are doing great and don't support folks that aren't. and try to recognize businesses that are doing well. So promote the ones that are doing the right thing. And in terms of recognition, and again, a little plug at the state level. At the state, and this is handled by my agency, we have something called the Governor's Environmental Stewardship Awards. And it's a pretty cool thing. And we hand out, I think, about well, I don't know, 15 or 20 awards every year to various businesses and nonprofits and governments across the state. And we invite them to come to Nashville and have a luncheon. It's an award luncheon. It's a really great thing. The governor is there. This is really important to him. And we recognize the businesses, the nonprofits, the governments. We recognize everybody that's doing well. And this is just an amazing thing. Those folks eat this up. They could not be prouder of this. And I've gotten so many follow-ups from businesses saying, well, we did this and we got an award for it. So now we want to do all these other things as well. So just kind of patting people on the back and telling them they're doing great is it's just amazing what kind of a response you get from that. So we do it at the state, can be done at the local level as well, and I encourage that. So you can also work to change government practices. And here I'm not really talking about state government. They hear me whining plenty. I'm talking about the local governments. So questions I have is, and I use Knoxville when I talk to Shelby because she's in Lenore City, so I'll use Knoxville again. And I don't know the answer to this question, but does Knoxville's contracts when they buy stuff, are they required to have recycling content? When Knoxville requires businesses, or excuse me, structures to be demoed, do they require that the demolition material actually get recycled? So that's something you can build into contracts, and that's something that can be pushed at the local level. Knoxville has a lot of buildings. So are they capturing recycling in buildings? So that's something that we're not doing as well as we should at the state. Again, I've whined and whined and whined about our doing a better job with state-run buildings, which we have a contract and have a company that manages that. So we're cautiously optimistic that that can be picked up in the next contract. But until they do, they're just going to listen to me whine and whine and whine. So but work that same concept at the local level. This is probably not something that you all can do, but I want to mention it just for completeness. Public-private partnerships, and by public, I mean local governments. They can team and form joint ventures with private companies, and I've often wondered why we don't have material recycling facilities where we capture materials and sort them. They should be public-private partnerships. Public entities can get grants. They have taxation benefits. There's a lot of things that public entities have going for them. And the private companies, they have access to capital, a lot of capital, and they have managerial expertise that is very helpful in running these sorts of things. So if you're ever talking to somebody and the topic of public-private partnerships comes up, I think that's an underutilized sort of thing. We should be doing more of that. But strategy 3, and this should be well within y'all's wheelhouse, education. So a lot of what we're doing wrong, we know to do right. We're just not doing it. So here's some things that you guys can educate people for. Number one, know what materials can be recycled. And that's going to vary from place to place. Not all plastics can be recycled. Glass is a particularly problematic material right now. So it's very difficult, can't be accepted everywhere, but cardboard almost universally can, certain plastics can almost universally can, steel, aluminum, but know what can be. I have seen people that have taken like worn out garden hoses and thrown them in to recycling bins. And they say, well, pretty sure that that can be recycled. Well, some stuff can be recycled, but it just has to be separated, and it takes so long to reduce it to the recycled aspects that financially it just can't be done. So when folks see stuff that can't be recycled or is not cost effective to be recycled, it just goes to the landfill. So not only can your recycling stuff themselves be contaminated, your whole bin of recycling can be contaminated as well. So know what can be recycled, know what they're going to accept, know what can be used, and kind of stick to recycling that. Um, Choose products differently. I would spend a few minutes and go through your refrigerator. Right now, I'm embarrassed to admit I still have a little bit of glass, but for the most part, I have purged glass from my refrigerator, and I'm buying things in plastic now. Glass theoretically can be recycled, but practically there's very little use, very little market for the material. And as soon as you have to move it, it's so heavy. If you've got to ship it anywhere and it costs so much money to move, it's just becomes negative economic value very quickly. Whereas plastic is light, plastic ones and twos for sure is readily recyclable. It's even gotten to the point where I have switched completely to boxed wines, not drinking it out of bottles anymore. Uh, and I get that the cardboard part of the boxed wine completely recyclable, and I do recycle all that. The plastic liner is one of those multi-layered polymers that I talked about, cannot be recycled practically, so that gets end up thrown away, and that saddens me. Hopefully there will be a day where that's different, but still, the glass can't be. I know the boxed wine can, so change what you're doing to align with what can be, and preach that gospel to other folks as well. Um, Keep end of product life in mind. At some point, stuff's going to have to be deconstructed. So if you can buy stuff that can easily be deconstructed and recycling, um, do that. And I've already touched on the containers, aluminum versus plastic. So I don't buy much boxed wine because I barely drink it all, and I don't hardly drink beer at all. But I understand that beer can come in aluminum, come in glass, and come in plastic. Although I've never actually had it out of plastic, I know it's available. So glass is a problem thing. Aluminum, readily recyclable, although it has some issues that are outside the scope of this discussion. Plastic's pretty simple and straightforward. So change the way you buy your products. So I promise this is the last time I'm going to be squawking about contaminated recyclables. Please stop. Please make sure they're clean. I'm going to mute you for a moment to cough. Sorry about that. I can speak again. It's a miracle. So films can't be recycled by and large, or they can be, but it takes different material. So if you have bags from grocery stores, take them back to the grocery stores. They're collected and processed differently. So do that. And composite materials, they just can't be recycled. So I talked about the liner that my wine comes in. I could throw that in the recycling bin, but that becomes a contaminant because it can't be recycled. So don't do that. I don't do that. Rinse your beverage containers, okay? Make them nice and clean. The cleaner the stuff is, the more valuable it is. So you're not going to risk having a whole bunch of good stuff thrown away because you've got a dirty container, and it helps the recycling outfit get a better price for it. Um, so soup cans, peanut butter jars, all that stuff, not the glass peanut butter jars, now the plastic ones like I have in my house. Um, when I'm through, I clean them out as good as I can. Not because I'm that big on recycling, but I'm cheap and I can't stand the thought of throwing away something that I paid money for. But when I'm through cleaning out as best as I can, run it through the dishwasher, make it nice and clean so that I know it's perfectly acceptable for the recyclers. Pizza boxes, so I don't eat pizza much either, but I have seen them and they're like normally have this big gross greasy stain in the middle of it. Yes, it's cardboard. No, it can't be recycled. That greasy stain pretty well contaminates it. Throw it away. Do not put it in with your other cardboard. If the cardboard folks see that, they'll throw the whole bale away. So don't do that. Throw that pizza box away. And don't put recyclables in an unrecyclable container. Appalled when people put aluminum cans into Walmart grocery bags. It's fine for the short term, but then they throw that whole mess in their recycling bin, and all that results in that whole bin going to the landfill because they won't take it because that bag will gum up the shredders, and they'll have to stop the line to do a lot of work just to peel that stuff out. So don't do it. Don't do it. You're costing people a lot of time and money if it gets by, but it won't get by. If they see a bag of cans, they'll just send the whole load to the landfill. Please don't do that. So here's something that if you have curbside recycling, which I do not, but even the company that I do recycle with, they leave me a tag if something unsuitable should get in there. So that's helpful. That's continuous improvement. That's feedback. So I know, oops, I put that in there. They don't take that. I need to do better about that. So technology is coming to the rescue. So in the near future, and I think within a couple of years, there's going to be technology where the recyclers are going to like email you or text you a notification saying, hey, we couldn't pick up your load. You had this in there, or we took it anyway, but we had to separate it out. Please don't put this in there. So just getting that feedback, I think, is really very helpful. All right, social media. So I'm old and decrepit, but I rely on you millennials to get out there and make use of this social media to spread proper information. So get out there and let everybody know. Here's what you should be doing. Here's what you should not be doing. So get out there and communicate, communicate, communicate. I know I myself need to hear something about 10 times before it actually sticks. So don't be hesitant to over communicate on that. And the other thing, and truth be told, I stole this from John McFadden, but I think it was a great idea because he thought it would be a wonderful thing if we could get to the point where we could gamify recycling and get households competing against other households, streets competing against other streets, and neighborhoods competing against other neighborhoods. So I think John's right. Rather than nagging people and recycling, shaming them, just gamifying it, getting people exciting and turning it into something fun, I think is really, really a good thing. So I want to end or come close to ending on something. So I've kind of talked about general stuff that y'all should be doing. So this is very specific to you. Yes, I'm looking at the person that you look in the mirror at too. This is what you can do to improve recycling. And I'm going to start with something that I described earlier as a pet peeve, but it's really worse than a pet peeve because food waste is just a moral issue. Just a moral issue. We as a country have a moral imperative to do better. It's reprehensible that at the same time that we have people that are hungry in this country, that we are shipping huge amounts of food to landfills. 30% or better of materials that landfills received are unconsumed food. We have got to do better. Help your food bank. Make sure that you're not wasting food. We at TDEC have done a very good job. We have, as part of recyclable efforts, we have actually sent a lot of money to Second Harvest so that they can, I mean a lot of money, to set up food banks so that they can not only capture food that otherwise would be going to landfills, but to feed people. And if we're gonna recycle anything, food is the number one thing to recycle. There's just a more moral imperative to quit wasting that food and to get it into the stomachs of hungry people. All right, so sorry about that. I will get off my soapbox. So, and I've already mentioned this, but be active with your city and county leaders. Let them know recycling is important, and it's your expectation that they improve what they are doing on recycling. that we can do a little bit at the state, but mostly this has to be done at the local level. Work with businesses. I think nonprofits and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which is the way I described environmental outfits, don't work enough with businesses and industries. We should do better because we're all sort of in this together. So we want recycling to catch. Well, they need to make products out of this, the materials that we're capturing. So help the businesses do better and support them when they do better. um, and find out, communicate with the businesses. Are they getting what they need? Can we, as the generator of feedstock for them, can we change what we're doing to help them do better at recycling? So are we missing organizations that we should be working with? Nobody does this alone. We do this as a community. I'm gonna have to put you on hold just for a moment, sorry. It is allergy season and I'm suffering grievously from that. Um, so are you guys working closely with Tennessee Recycling Coalition? They're a wonderful organization. I think the world of them. So if you're not, please do. And if you are, thank you for doing that. They're a great outfit. Schools. Schools can recycle. Kids want to recycle. So do we have recycling programs in our local schools? Are we recapturing food waste? The amount of food that I've seen wasted in school cafeterias is horrific. Is there something we can do to recapture that? That's something that can be done. So let's do what can be done. Local governments is the city of Knoxville and Knox County. Are they doing recycling? Are they requiring recycling content in their contracts? So let's work that. Let's make something happen there. What other local organizations out there that you can work with that maybe you haven't thought to work with before? Restaurant associations. And restaurant associations spring to mind. Although we weren't able to make this come to fruition, that saddens me, but we're going to take another run at it. We at TDEC were working with the local restaurant association here in Nashville to try to site, design, and stand up a composting facility such that all the waste and not all food can be repurposed to the hungry. Some just, has to be wasted. But rather than going to a landfill with it, can we turn it into compost and make a product out of it that way? And we're fairly close to making that happen, and it fell through. We weren't able to make that happen. But is that something that could be happening in your backyard? Can you be working with the local restaurants to capture bottles and cans and plastics, things like that, to reuse their waste and keep that from going to the landfill? So reach out to the local restaurant associations and civic and business organizations. So if you're trying to bring industries into your area, that's good for the local chamber of commerce, and they would probably be supportive and they would help with that. So I would reach out to civic and business organizations, see if you can work together to make those things happen. But most importantly, and this is really, really, really important, educate, 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 educate. Even people that you think know, remind and educate and encourage. So it's sort of a thankless task at times, God knows. Uh, but it's really important to encourage folks when you are doing well. And I'm reminded of the folks that were in Northwest Tennessee. They were woo-hooing and high-fiving each other when they saw on a bar chart that they had made a significant difference and that we at the state, had we been paying closer attention, would be able to see the improvements that they were making. So pump each other up, encourage one another, and help one another out. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. We all got to work together on this. So the last thing I've got is stuff to help with, give you some resources. So I've got actually 3 pages of links. So it's a lot of links. I'm not going to go through them, but they are going to be made available on your website. They are not all nonprofits. A lot of them are. A lot of them are businesses, and I'm going to point out Republic and Waste Management. They actually have a business where they manage recycling. They do pickup, and they sell that recycling off. So they have a vested economic interest in getting good solid recyclables. So they have a lot of good information on their website. So I would encourage you to use them. So they're all available to you. Again, not going to walk through them. And with that, I'm going to end with questions and some contact information. In the past, I would have just put my name because I was in the Division of Solid Waste Management, but that's my contact information, my hard line, and my email address. I've also added Larry Chrisley's email. He's in the Materials Management Group, the Division of Solid Waste Management, and Larry is like super knowledgeable about recycling and how stuff gets done and who's doing it where and what. So he's a great resource. So, and that's the two things the state provides. We provide consulting and resources for information, and we can help you find out about stuff, and we can also provide money when the economy gets better. So with that, I will end and turn it over to Shelby for questions and answers.
Well, thank you so much, Pat. Let's get ourselves back into.
Okay, so I've stopped sharing and now I'm going to mute
Okay,
myself.
great. So we'll go back into the Q&A kind of mode. And so I guess before we get into some of the questions, I want to welcome those that joined us after we started. So please say hello in the chat and let us know where you're listening from. And also, this is being recorded, so we'll be able to, you'll be able to look at it if you missed anything. And for everyone that was here, you can, watch it again. I'm trying to think about, oh yes, and then also, as Pat said, the slides will be made available to you as well. So concerning questions, I have something in the chat. Let me look here. So Pat, can you talk about why the food waste initiatives with restaurants failed?
Yeah, it's sort of a long, complicated sort of thing, but it had to do with their inability to find a piece of land that was suitable and that I have time durations on grants. So we had the entity that was trying to set it up had problems with their land. They thought they were good to go. The folks that they were getting the land from came back and said, no, there's a change. We're not going to make that available. So they had to scramble around to try to find other parcels of land. And they had also some issues with costs and technologies. And they did find another parcel of land, but they had to go through Jackson law approval for siting, and that got messy. And anyway, had to do with the just not having a suitable piece of land. If they had had a piece of land that would have worked right out of the gate, they had their funding lined up, they had their stuff ready to procure, it would have worked out. It was just a funky land issue.
Okay. Also, Pat, we have a question here. On your last slide, you mentioned the importance of education. So how do you define education? What activities and does that all entail?
Well, that's a good question. So I will tell you what I think. Education, I think, best happens at a very local level. So I think when you talk to people and you say, hey, we're doing recycling, and you can give them information on how to do it right, how to do it wrong. Also very beneficial to post information. And I've not spent quite enough time on TEC's website, but hopefully you do have information on how to post things correctly. TDEC has some stuff on their website, but we got a huge amount of stuff on the website, so it's hard to find. So I think it's a matter of providing the information, it's almost marketing. Here's the information that we have, and here's the information that we're trying to get out to people. So you're trying to connect the two. So it can happen by, postings. It can happen with, flyers and leaflets, although I don't like the fact that you waste paper by doing that. It can be mass emails. It can be, websites, and I've tried to do it in this case by getting out and preaching a lot. And my apologies for being so preachy, but I do a lot of these to try to get the message out, and always try to leave links. If you want to know more, if you have questions, do this. So, was there an
Okay,
answer
great.
in there?
Yes, thank you for answering that, Pat. And we have more questions in the chat, so we'll continue to go through them. So this question, given the problems with plastics on human health and the environment, how can we incentivize or offset the cost of glass recycling?
So, two parts to that. So I'll talk about the plastics piece. And the plastics in the environment are really a function of us doing a lousy job on collecting and letting those plastics get into the environment. We don't need to do that. We need to do better. Um, and actually, many countries do reasonably well at that, but some of the poor countries just struggle to control their plastics that they don't, they just can't control them. They just don't have a way to capture and recycle them. Technology is our friend. So I talked about that. I kind of like companies. One of the companies that I like really well is Tennessee Eastman, and they are in the process of developing a process where they can take plastics and deconstruct it back to the base molecules and then make more plastics from those base molecules. So that's going to be a game changer because that prevents us from having to do a lot of expensive and time consuming sorting and figuring out what we can recycle, what we can't recycle. It takes those multi-layered films completely off the table because they just get all destroyed the same. So that's very exciting. We're encouraging them to take this research that they've done and bring it to market. So um, but you still got to capture the stuff. So we still need to do a better job of capturing. So we just got to keep it from getting in the environment. Fish don't like to eat it, and it's just bad for wildlife. So we need to do better on that. The basic problem with controlling it is that we just got so much of it, and so if we can provide an economic incentive for Eastman to turn it back into the plastic, great. That should resolve a lot of the problem. I'm a big believer that we can and should do better on glass. That's a tough problem. I wish I had a better answer. The answer that we are moving towards are twofold. And Shelby, I mentioned one to you about a bottle bill yesterday. So by and large, I'm not really big on government interference, but there's a time and a place for it. So if we could have a bottle bill just for glass and recapture beer bottles and send them back to the brewery to be refilled, I think that would be great. They're largely standard sizes, standard colors. I think that's doable. Wine bottles have more variety. That would be tough. The other thing that we're doing is kind of trying to work with the glass manufacturers to try to get them to be more involved because they can be part of the solution. They can try to make sure that those glass materials get used or that they have a skin in the game regarding reuse and recycling of this. And right now, they're not really involved at all. So I don't exactly know what that solution looks like, but I'm confident that the glass manufacturers have to be part of that solution. The other thing that I see is there are things that we can do to drive up uses for glass. Um, and I'm going to promote the town of Gallatin that I think did something that was very clever. They were receiving glass at their recycling center, but they couldn't do much of anything. They just couldn't hardly find markets. So what they did is they went to my agency and asked for a grant, which we gave them, and they used the grant money for a glass crusher, which they set up pretty close to where the recycling facility is. So there's not really any hauling costs, it's just right there. And they're grinding up the glass and they're using it on structural fill on their roadway and sidewalk projects. So that just seems great. Saves them the cost of the structural fill, uses up the material. That sort of thing is just great. Again, can happen at the local level. Not sure that that's the solution to all the glass problem, but it's a solution to some of the glass problem. So a lot of moving parts, not an easy solution on glass.
Okay. So Pat, thank you for that. And we have some other questions and comments about that, but I'm taking things in order. And I know that we have folks from various spaces, so please feel free to share comments as well. Those are great too. So just going down the line here, I have two related questions about pizza boxes. So, and I could just read them both, but you can handle them together. So first, do you recommend putting the clean top of pizza boxes in the recycling or leaving out all of the pizza box? And then the other related question is, how clean is clean? Like the tiniest bit of grease on a pizza box or speck of food on a plastic container or metal can?
Boy, you're a tough crowd. So I'm actually a big believer in salvaging anything that can be salvaged. So that's a good point. I wished I had made it, is rip the top off the pizza box as long as it doesn't have any stains on it. In fact, if you wanted to be real good about it, you could take out some heavy scissors and just cut out the part that's contaminated, remove that, and the rest of the box is perfectly good. Anything that can be recycled should be recycled. So, so I applaud folks for that. There was a second part of that question. I've forgotten it.
Oh, let me see here. So, how clean is clean?
How clean is clean?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's sort of like asking which way the wind blows. It's a very difficult question to answer, and the short answer is it depends. A more practical answer is I will tell you what China has done in terms of their cleanliness roughly. I can't remember if they said 1 or 2%, but in that range, 1 to 2% of unsuitable materials is the upper range of the contaminant level that they will accept. And I think that that's a pretty good rule of thumb. That's what we're trying. I know that there are some organizations that can take more than that, but if you can drive contamination down to 1 to 2%, then you're almost always going to be good. So that should be the goal.
Thank you.
And that's really clean, by the by.
Okay. So going back to glass, there were some comments and questions about it. So one comment, I think it's important to stress that there's a big and hungry market for glass. The problem is how it is collected, typically in low quantities and badly contaminating, including mixing of colors. There's really only one way to correct both issues, and it's deposit return. The glass industries have been supporting bottle bills for a decade. If one were to pass here, our glass recycling problem, in quotes, would go away. And we've seen better PET and aluminum can rates as well. And so that's a comment. And then a related question is, what about the glass deposit law? So Pat, do you have some additional comments in light of some of the chat content?
I do. So, and I think I had mentioned that I think in this case that recycling of or bottle bills makes sense, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about glass bottle bills is the deposit sort of thing. Agree with almost everything that was said there. In that the problem with glass in terms of like crushing it down and making new glass, not that the technology is not available, not that that can't be done, but as soon as you ship it, it's so expensive to ship, and glass is cheap because you're competing against virgin glass, which is really, really cheap. I mean, it's made out of sand. Sand is everywhere, so that's really kind of a problem. It's hard to drive the cost down to where it's something productive. So in the Division of Solid Waste Management, I did get involved a fair amount on legislative evaluations and did have meetings with people that were proposing bottle bills, and we did what we could, but we're not as an agency allowed to advocate or lobby or do anything that would get us in trouble really fast. But, the folks did come to us and say, hey, what do you think about this? Can this work? Blah, 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 blah. But always people in an NGO, people that were pushing it on the environmental side. I have yet to have anybody from the glass manufacturers come to me and say, we'd like TDEC to support you on that. So not that it couldn't be happening, maybe it's at a different level than where I'm at, but I have never heard of anybody from the glass manufacturing saying that they're supportive of bottle bills. So right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what I know.
Okay. And with that, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are at the 1 hour and 10-minute mark. So we have 20 minutes left for Q&A. So people are welcome to add more questions, and I can keep going through the chat, but I didn't know if anyone wanted to ask a question orally. So I wanted to make sure that I stopped to make space for that if you would prefer to ask your question to Pat with audio instead. Okay. So if that's the case, I can keep with some of these. Okay, so there are a few questions about plastics. So one, why can't plastics with 1 or 2 be recycled, like clamshells that hold strawberries? So in the comment, I struggle throwing these into the landfill. So yeah, can you talk more about 1 and 2s?
As far as I know, they can be recycled. Even the company that I pay to come to receive my recycling, that's what they're taking. They're taking 1s and 2s. They're not taking the others. So 1s is PET, very recycled, easy recycled material. 2 is HDPE, slightly more difficult. But as far as I know, not only are folks taking it, that there's a pretty good marketing out there. Regarding the clamshells, so those can be of various different polymers, so you need to be a little careful. Some of them are polystyrene, so that's not generally a recycled material. So look long and hard at your clamshells. But yes, please, by all means, recycle 1s and 2s, and please do not send them to the landfill.
And so a question that I also have here is about incentives and priorities. So Pat, do you have any thoughts about how we can prioritize stopping waste at the source, making manufacturers more responsible for products from cradle to grave? And then there's also a comment here about plastics production leading to, plastics production and fracking are increasing. So do you have any thoughts about that, how we can change to stop, I guess, the production of plastics at the source to reduce how many we have?
So I think that one's going to be hard to do because plastics are just sort of embedded in our life right now, and manufacturers use a lot of plastics for things like packaging to protect their products. And if you had to deal with a lot of stuff that you were shipping, breaking and stuff, you'd probably want to do something about it as well. But what I have always thought could happen, and this would largely happen through industrial organizations or manufacturing organizations, is not so much that the plastics, excuse me, but we've got a flat zillion plastic polymers out there. And if we could get it down to a few standard polymers, if we had 3 or 4 different polymers that were used for various things, and that they were polymers that were easy to recycle, if they were all, PET and HDPE and, something else that's readily recyclable, I think that would be a good thing. And I have occasionally gone to conferences where I meet with manufacturers, and I've kind of pitched this idea. Do we need all these crazy different polymers that are marginally better? And is there a way we can get away from laminating things together in such a way that they can't be taken apart? But that's, it's a good idea that we can do that, I think, but we'll have to we have to change the way that manufacturing is done. And I think that largely happens when people stop buying products that are overpackaged and are using crazy polymers that can't be recycled.
Okay. So Pat, the next question is related in the space. So how do you have any thoughts or feedback about how to effectively give feedback to businesses that maybe are doing positive things regarding recyclable materials? Because I know that you mentioned the awards, so that might be like at a annual level, but in our day to day. So have you gotten any feedback about what are some effective ways that folks can give feedback to businesses when they are doing a good job?
Yeah, so again, that's something that I try to do on a very personal level when I thank them for doing stuff. So I talked about the Governor Stewardships Award. There's also Green Star partnerships. So I'll tell a quick story. In my apologies for running long. I know it was my piece that ran long, and now folks are like starved to death and running out of time and stuff. And I also probably need to couch this by saying some of what I say and everything on my slides, I speak for the department, but as I'm talking about personal opinions about how things should be done, a lot of this stuff is just that, my personal opinion. But Green Star Partnerships, we had an organization that came to us and it was trying to recycle a hazardous waste, and we're struggling with how to make that happen. With really had to do with a permit issue. So rather than sending letters back and forth as we had been doing, I picked up the phone and called them and said, hey, we're supportive of what you want to do. We're going to find a way to work through this legal and regulatory issue to find it, to make it happen. So it was a good thing that I had called, because they said, good, because yes, starting tomorrow, we were going to sell the equipment. So timing couldn't have been better for that. So they got this thing, stood up and took all this hazardous waste that was being sent out to a hazardous waste landfill for disposal, and now it's being repurposed very beneficially. So we also put them in line, nominated them for a Green Star award, in which they got. And it's like, now these guys are the biggest environmentalists on the planet. They are just so pumped up over this because they won an award. So there is some of that. Sometimes you're going to have to talk to other people that are in more indirect contact. Again, I go to a lot of conferences and things like that, try to pass the word on because there are manufacturing representatives there. But probably the best thing you can do is vote with your pocketbook, and send not hate mail, but send notes that says, we do not like what you are doing. We would prefer you do something else. And as a result, I am no longer buying your product. And I am encouraging everybody I know in all my organizations not to buy your product as well. That will generally get their attention.
All right. So I think I'm at the end of the questions list, or
Am
questions I'm
am
seeing
I
in the
on
chat.
audio?
Oh, yes, Steve, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I sent a question in there, but I wasn't sure. I'm not a Zoom person. I've been working on a similar type of program in Rutherford County for over a year now, and have come up with how we're actually going to try and implement a MRF and actually start it. In this process, I've come up with a way to decontaminate your waste material before it actually gets processed. I've been a packaging engineer for decades. I'm a retired executive business owner, entrepreneur, but have come up with a way to take that waste stream before it's actually handled and decontaminate it from the pathogens and viruses so that it can be handled safely as a continuous process. And I'd like to discuss this more with Patrick on private, since he's an engineer actually doing it. And my methodology, I've talked to Vanderbilt Medical Clinic as far as the type of temperatures and time underneath, but I think it's very doable. And it's a process that can be retrofitted. It'll really change how we're really handling this, because that's in the recycling business, that's a big concern now, is contamination and how do you handle that? And I think I have a solution for it. So I'm just throwing that out there. What it is, I was in the corrugated business for decades. And in the corrugation process, they have a section where they actually heat the paper up to take out the moisture from forming the flutes. as well as drying the glue. That section is called the double backer. It goes through an oven, more or less, and it runs at 1,000 feet a minute, 350 degrees. All you need to do is slow it down to about 170 degrees and run the material through there for 20 seconds. It's like washing your hands. That's why you need that temperature. 170 degrees kills all viruses and pathogens, and that's verified through Vanderbilt. So 20 seconds is all you really need to kill it. Slow that piece of equipment down, and used equipment is available in the marketplace now for pennies on the dollar. You know, to build a new corrugator, you need a minimum of $15 million. I built a specialty corrugator to make corrugation like plywood as a continuous process. I bought 2 pieces of equipment, corrugation equipment, for $250,000. We are up and going. It was a nice little market. We had to shut it down when the last credit crunch came in 2008. We had to shut our business down in 2009. But I built a factory, and I think I can do this again. But I'd like to discuss with Patrick, since he's got engineering background, of, okay, how feasible is this really at? And I've got the schematics and all for it. So I'd like to private message you so we can talk specifics of how this can actually be implemented starting in Rutherford County. But First Horizon Bank is willing to help finance this whole deal. I've gone that far.
God bless. Technology to the rescue again. So yeah, you've got my email and my phone number. So by all means, give me a call, and
Okay.
we can help spread the gospel on this. That sounds great.
It all starts with an idea. I'm passionate about this for personal reasons. So my story is, I moved to Murfreesboro in '76, had a bicycle shop. My youngest daughter was a year old. She developed leukemia when she was 7. That section of Murfreesboro where I live has one of the highest lead contaminations in the United States. After Flint, Michigan, the federal government tested all zip codes for lead contamination in the United States. Where I lived and moved to originally ranks the high number 9 for lead contamination, close to MTSU. But nobody knows that whenever I talk about it. After we had a big environmental disaster, really, with a waste treatment plant for the water department on one of the historic farms, the woman had given access to her property for the waste treatment facility. They had a spill, emptied 440,000 gallons of effluent from the treatment plant onto her farm, totally contaminating it, going into Stones River, and it just irritated me. Her granddaughter and my grandson had kindergarten together at the school, and I was volunteering. So her granddaughter decided she was going to marry my grandson when they're 5 years old. So it was that kind of friendship that developed. I cannot have my grandson growing up in a toxic community knowing that I could do something about it. So that's my motivation factor. It's not money or anything else, but that's my story. But I'd like to talk to you how I can contribute this. So
Okay,
Patrick,
that sounds great.
I spread that gospel wherever I go. It's a little long. Nobody really cares but me, but that's it. But thank you very much. A lot of what you were proposing, I've already come up with ways to try and do it. There is a plastic wood that we can manufacture. I want to go to the pallet industries to do that. I sold packaging, and that's a $6 billion market. And 60% of that market is rework facilities. I contacted the Amish, which are very environmentally conscious, that were building pallets. Fuyao Glass that opened up in Dayton, Ohio, took an old GE plant. I was the packaging engineer that helped them transform their packaging going from China to the US. And I had international connections to be able to do that. You know, I've been dealing with Nissan when I was a trailer out on the farm that they started. I'm very knowledgeable and I've got contacts to be able to do those type of things. So anyway, have a good day. Thank you. And I will contact you personally.
Sounds great. You sound like a guy I need to know. So thanks for that.
It's not what you know, it's who you know. I've learned that a long time ago.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve, for sharing, and also Pat for your feedback there. And I think with that, we can go ahead and close because there are a few wrap-up things that we have to do. Again, Pat's presentation will be made available, so I have his slides and we'll share them. And in terms of announcements, please save the date on your calendars for Friday, August 28th. That is the day we have set aside for our annual policy and practice meeting. So we have these policy and practice spaces online. We've been doing them every other month, but we will also have our annual meeting, and we're talking about what it'll look like and the exact times, but just hold that date. But it will involve a discussion about moving toward belonging in the conservation or environmental movement. And so we'll talk about historic and past barriers for full participation for all Tennesseans. So, please look out from us and our newsletter or what have you regarding all of that. And I guess, Jeff, is there anything else that you wanted to mention in terms of announcements before we close out?
No, I appreciate, Pat, your great information, eye-opening presentation, and really your delivery as well. It was really fun to hear the information. So good work, and I appreciate you sharing a hopeful vision for what we can do in Tennessee. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, TDEC, for support on our recycling and organics management, food waste reduction and recovery efforts through composting and better recycling in Tennessee. So thank you, TDEC and Pat, for all your support in that as well.
Oh, glad to do it. And thanks for what everybody does. We're all in this together, and none of us can move the needle individually. So we all got to work together to make this happen.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much, Pat, and everyone that came. Please, thank you so much for coming, and please look out for our future events. As I said, our next one in August, and then the months to come for 2020. So for everyone, please stay safe wherever you are, and have a great Friday.